My parents thought it would be funny to leave me alone at a broken-down train station in Kansas. Let's see how he finds his way home. My mom laughed. I stood there clutching a warm can of soda waiting for the joke to end. But it didn't. The car never came back. I was 11. That was the last day I ever called them family. I taught myself to survive. I changed my name, built a life from the ground up, and promised myself I'd never answer another call from the past. But this morning I woke up to 41 missed calls. My brother's name flashing on my screen, my father's old voice haunting my voicemail. Everything you have is because of me. 20 years of silence, and suddenly they want me back. Why now? What do you owe the people who left you behind? Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say "listening" in the comments or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reaches. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. If you care about stories of survival, family, and the power to walk away from what hurts you, please subscribe to this channel. My name is Caleb Walker, and this is where it all begins. I still remember the way the sunlight burned gold along the endless rows of corn as our car rattled down that lonely Kansas highway. My 11-year-old hands pressed flat against the fogged backseat window, tracing the lines of passing telephone wires, while my father's voice kept slicing the air. If only you tried half as hard as your brother Ren. Noah never gave us trouble. My mother didn't bother looking at me. Her voice was soft but sharp, dripping disappointment, always ready to turn any silence into a lesson I'd never asked for. I wanted to go home to sink into my pillow and disappear, not sit trapped in their endless scorekeeping. The only warmth in the car came from the setting sun, and even that felt temporary. The car veered off at a weathered sign, Prairie Ridge Station. My father's jaw tightened as he threw the car into park. "Go get us drinks. Make it quick." The engine hummed as if even it was tired of waiting. Noah stared at his shoes, caught between wanting to help and knowing he couldn't. I tumbled out, clutching a wrinkled $10 bill, stepping into the chill. The air was thick with the smell of rust and distant rain, and the train station looked abandoned dust sifting through the cracked glass. The vending machine blinked an unfriendly orange. I fed in coins one at a time, counting in my head, trying not to think. Of course, the machine jammed, spitting out lukewarm soda with a mocking thunk. I scooped up the cans, my shoes scuffing on the grit, hurrying back, afraid of their impatience. But the car was gone, just tire marks on gravel-empty space where my family had been, the sound of wind rattling the old roof above me. I stood there, cold, sticky can in hand, thinking maybe it was another test, some twisted joke. I called my mother's cell voicemail again and again, until my fingers shook and the wind nearly drowned out her message. "Let's see how long it takes you to find your way home. This is your lesson in independence." The message played twice before I let the phone drop its blue screen, burning through the growing dark. My heart hammered not out of anger, but a deep, hollow fear. A kid realizing he was alone and nobody was coming. I sat on a splintered bench, staring at the tracks stretching into nowhere. The metal smelled damp, the wood beneath me cold, every noise too loud. For a while I just counted the money in my wallet, $120 from mowing lawns, the sum total of my summer. I remembered the shed behind our house, the way my father locked me in there after I broke a vase the night I slept outside in the snow when I lost his game tickets. Every lesson added up, brick by brick, until I wasn't sure where they ended, and I began. A semi-truck pulled in, headlights swinging through dusk. The driver, a man with tired eyes, noticed me right away. "You all right, kid?" I shook my head. Words stuck somewhere deep. He offered me his phone, asked if I needed help, and waited without pressing. I borrowed the phone, fingers shaking, and called the only number that mattered. DeRuth answered on the second ring, her voice, steady as always, didn't waste time with blame. "Stay there. I'll be there soon." She didn't ask what happened. She knew. I blocked my parents' numbers. I wrote down the directions the driver gave me for the bus just in case. I took his business card. Edge's soft numbers faded a tiny lifeline to a world that wasn't all cold. I watched the sun sink behind the cornfields, the world getting smaller and quieter, and tried to believe I'd wake up from all of this. I sat for hours on that bench, fear turning to anger into something like resolve. At last, headlights cut through the dark. Ruth's car rolled up slow and sure. I got in and didn't look back, hands tight on my $120. The soda can sweating between my knees. No words passed between us until we were miles away. She just rested her hand on my shoulder, and somehow I knew it was over. That night before sleep finally took me, I pulled out my wallet and scrolled a line on the inside. No one gets to define me but me. At 11, I didn't know what kind of promise that was. I just knew it had to hold. Wichita became my second chance. Not because it was easy, but because it was mine. Ruth handled paperwork and phone calls, forged a little fortress around us. She let me breathe, let me sleep in on weekends, but also had me balance her checkbook by the end of my first semester. She'd stay up late with me at the kitchen table, walking me through receipts, taxes, even how to read the fine print on a lease. Numbers are rules, Caleb. They don't care who your parents are. It was a quiet education, sometimes silent but always sure. I learned to work. I waited tables, delivered newspapers before sunrise, fixed computers for neighbors after school. With each job, I tucked away a little more cash, a little more pride. Ruth watched but never hovered. She just made sure there was always a sandwich in the fridge, a light left on when I came home. I got good at putting things in order. Budget schedules, my own racing thoughts. Still, some nights I lay awake wondering if they'd show up again, if somewhere out there my family even noticed I was gone. Seattle came next, a city humming with rain and neon, the river always in view. I rented a room overlooking the bus station. The same uneasy feeling in my stomach every time the schedules changed. My first job was at a scrappy little startup coding late into the night. That's where I met Evan, crouched under a flickering server rack, cursing out a tangled cable. We skipped lunch together more times than I could count, swapping stories, not so much talking as filling in the gaps for each other. Evan called me the quiet fixer. I never corrected him. The startup went under burnout budget cuts, all the things nobody warns you about when you're starting over, but it taught me how to build how to fail and try again. Out of that mess came the idea for North Star Labs. My apartment kitchen became the first office. A whiteboard propped up on the counter with "Let's build a star to steer by" scrolled across it in marker. Evan was my first partner. Miles, my first real advisor. We built software that flagged dangerous signals on social media for small businesses. My own kind of alarm bell for others to hear before it was too late. We made it a rule. Every piece of code had to be transparent. Every contract fair, no exceptions. Seattle was a city for strays and second chances. I ran along the river before dawn. Met friends at indie coffee shops, tucked down alleys. Built something new out of the pieces no one else wanted. The Driftwood became our unofficial headquarters, a place to talk, to celebrate, to forget for a night what we were running from. When we landed, our first big investor, Miles combed through every line of the contract. Watch for clawback clauses. Family shows up when there's money on the table. He wasn't wrong. I let him build in legal walls, protections against anyone trying to claim what they'd thrown away. I didn't think I'd need them until the day I did. Not long after, Ruth handed me a small, battered tin box. Inside were faded printouts, my mother's text. "This is your lesson in independence." The gas receipt from the night she drove across the state to pick me up. Scribbled notes of every call I made, every voicemail I left that day. At the bottom, the business card from the truck driver numbers, barely visible but still there. I held the old paper and realized for the first time that my story wasn't just in my head. I had proof history roots that went deeper than pain. One night as rain hit the balcony glass, Miles told me to digitize it all, every scrap, every receipt. Memories fade, Caleb. Evidence doesn't. I promised I would, but the box sat unopened on my desk for weeks. Evan, meanwhile, had an idea. What if we built a way to trace anonymous accounts online, a tool to track where the trouble starts? We mocked it up for clients, but I couldn't help thinking who I'd really use it for. A few weeks later, Ruth quietly mentioned something she'd kept to herself after the train station. She filed a formal report with Family Safety Services. But my parents, the Walker family, pressed and twisted until the file got lost. She saved every letter, every name. It was the first time I understood that the world could be unfair and still try to fix itself if you refused to look away. I stood on my balcony that night, tin box and hand rain and city lights swirling together below me. The past wasn't gone. It was just waiting for me to be ready. This time I had allies' evidence and a voice of my own, and for the first time in 21 years I believed I might be ready to use it. Monday mornings at North Star Labs always started with the same routine sunlight broken by city clouds. The quiet hum of the Duwamish River, just past the glass. A dozen tabs open on my screens as the office filled with half-awake engineers and the smell of burnt coffee. I was knee-deep in proposals and onboarding docs. The low buzz of conversation around me almost soothing when an alert flashed red on my dashboard. Our own software, a web of AI sensors and anomaly flags, picked up a spike. Dozens of shadow accounts were suddenly circling my name online, probing old threads, commenting on archived news just out of view. At first I thought it was an internal audit or a new client stress test, but Evan leaned over my shoulder, eyes narrowed. That's not us. Look at those patterns. Someone's digging and it isn't pretty. I told myself it was a blip, maybe a board hacker, but something in the shape of the data felt personal, an itch under the skin. The day moved in fits and starts. An investor called VoiceBrisk asking if I'd seen a family situation trending on a niche forum. I brushed it off, told him not to worry. Kept my tone casual, but I could feel the floor shift just a little. This company was my name, my shield. Any rumor, any crack in the facade risked everything. I locked my screen, took a long breath, tried to focus on my code, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that dashboard. By sunset, the driftwood was thick with the low light of neon and rain. The band played some half-remembered Springsteen cover while Evan nursed a warm beer. He pushed me again gently but firmly to scan and digitize every artifact in the tin box Ruth gave me. If things get weird, you'll need receipts, Caleb. Proof that you get to own your story, not them. I promised, but my stomach twisted at the thought of reliving any of it. My mind drifted back to the past. The cold bench at Prairie Ridge, the echo of my mother's message in my ears. I told Evan I'd get to it. We changed the subject, letting the music wash away the tension for a moment, but it lingered. A thread pulled tight. That night, walking the corridor outside my apartment, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. No caller ID, just a harsh, growly voice on the other end. Everything you have is because of me. I deleted it without listening twice, but the words clung to me heavy and mean the way old bruises never really leave. It was my father's tone, unmistakable, even through the static, and my chest tightened, as if he could still reach me from 1,000 miles away. I tried to work. I drafted an outline for our next proposal. Triple-checked the numbers, forced myself to focus, but the energy in the room had shifted. My phone rattled once, twice, again, and again, until the screen was a column of red notifications. 41 missed calls, all from the same number. Noah, my brother's name, and block letters. Across the glass, daring me to answer, to break the silence I'd built brick by brick. My hands hovered over the screen, breath short, every part of me alive with old anxiety. I didn't pick up. I couldn't. The room seemed to shrink every electronic alert. Now a reminder that the past never really lets go. Not when it's family. I spent the next hour frozen, watching the dashboard, tracing every shadow account. Evan cross-referenced data and found that the number Noah called from had been pinging cell towers in Seattle for weeks. My brother wasn't across the country. He was in my city close enough to show up at my door if he wanted. Miles sent a curt message. "If you get direct contact, do not handle it alone." I set the tin box on my desk, unopened the weight of it, a reminder that I'd have to face all of this soon enough. The warning lights on the screen blinked in the dark, relentless. When the phone finally stopped, I stared at the words. Noah, 41, missed calls, my finger hovering over the call back button, but I couldn't move. The screen went black, leaving me in silence. I felt the story closing and old cycles spinning up, and knew nothing would ever be quite the same. Seattle rain always falls soft and gray, the kind that seeps through your coat, settles in your bones. I sat by the window at morning grind, watching cars flick past, puddles steam rising from the pavement. My coffee cooled untouched while I replayed Noah's message. His words rushed, almost desperate. "We need to talk. Please, just meet me." I prepped for the meeting like a strategy session. Voice recorder on exit routes, mapped Evan on standby in case anything went sideways. The last time I'd seen my brother was a decade ago, both of us younger and less battered by the world. He arrived late, hunched against the cold, looking nothing like the golden child I remembered. His hair was thinner shoulders, rounded his jacket too big as if he'd shrunk inside it. I almost pied him, but old memories bristled between us. We ordered 2 coffees, the awkward silence broken only by the drip of rain on glass. Noah cut straight to the chase. They lost their jobs. The house is going into foreclosure. Dad's health isn't great. Mom is barely holding it together. Caleb, we need your help. They need you. He stared at his hands, knuckles, white words spilling out like he'd rehearsed them 1,000 times. I listened cold and careful, the bench at Prairie Ridge burning in my mind. I told him what he already knew, that I had my own life, that I remembered every lesson Dad and Mom ever taught me, that there's a difference between helping out of love and being manipulated out of guilt. Noah pleaded, telling me family was all that mattered, but I stopped him. I reminded him of the train station, the car that never came back, the nights I spent counting my money in the dark, waiting for someone who wouldn't return. You don't get to ask me for loyalty when all I ever was to them was a cautionary tale. He looked away, eyes shining, and I felt the sharp edge of sadness, but I didn't soften. He confessed, voice breaking, that after leaving me at Prairie Ridge, our parents actually circled back, parked out of sight, and waited for hours just to see if I'd crack, if I'd come running home. They left for real only when they realized I wouldn't break. I felt anger flare a sick kind of clarity. Noah admitted that for years they used my failure as a lesson for him. Don't end up like your brother. Don't disappoint us. Don't ever stray from the script. The ache in his voice was real, but it didn't make the past any less sharp. I realized, sitting across from him in the gray Seattle morning, that I'd never truly been the son they wanted. I was the warning sign, the kid who left and proved their fears right. He asked again, a last plea to help save the family. I shook my head, firm but not cruel. I told him we each had to carry our own choices. I would not go back. Not for him. Not for them. Not for any apology offered 21 years too late. He nodded, defeated, tracing circles on the receipt with his finger. I picked up my bag, left cash on the table, and walked out without a glance back. The rain had stopped and the city felt cleaner, the weight in my chest lighter. For the first time, the chains linking me to that house in Kansas loosened. I stepped into the street, heart steady, knowing I was done letting old ghosts define me. At first, it was a trickle, 1 or 2 strange tags on old Instagram posts, a thread of comments from accounts I didn't recognize. Evan was the first to notice the sudden spike. He came into my office with his laptop open, brows pulled together, and showed me a Twitter account that had only existed for a few days, but already had hundreds of retweets. The thread was about me specifically, about how I'd abandoned my elderly parents, how I'd forgotten where I came from after making it big, how North Star Labs was built on betrayal. The user posted photos of my parents' house in Kansas, a screenshot of the train station, even my mother's text from years ago, twisted to look like evidence of my coldness. They tagged North Star Labs, turning my company into the center of a hashtag that began spreading through the local tech world. My phone started buzzing. First came panicked texts from staff, then questions from a few longtime clients. Some employees wanted to know if the stories were true. Others simply stopped looking me in the eye. The tension in the office almost tangible. My inbox flooded with emails from partners, some supportive, most asking for answers. A few were clearly written by people who'd been sent to script their language so eerily similar it could have come from a single hand. I called an emergency meeting. Evan displayed screenshots of the accounts involved, each with an IP address pointing straight back to my parents' home in Kansas. He compared the writing style, the timestamps, the details, shared enough to make it clear that my family was orchestrating the whole thing. My hands shook as I scrolled through the posts. What stung worst were the private comments, anonymous accounts dropping lines about the train station using words only someone inside my childhood home would know. They dredged up details about that afternoon at Prairie Ridge, repeating the narrative my parents had always used to shame me. It was clear they were willing to use every weapon, every wound, if it meant controlling the story. For a moment, I remembered the times I'd wanted to believe they would change. I thought about the few letters I'd written as a teenager and never sent, the holidays I'd spent in silence, the times I almost dialed their number. I had spent years wrestling with the urge to reach out, to forgive, to find closure. Now I saw how far they'd go to rewrite history, how quickly they'd turn my story against me the second it became inconvenient. The posts didn't stop. The hashtag caught on with a few journalists looking for easy headlines. A news site ran a piece titled, "Tech CEO Shuns Family." At what cost, customers started dropping off. A major investor sent a email requesting an urgent call. He wanted to know if the company was stable, if my personal drama would impact their bottom line. I barely slept, my mind spinning with anger and disbelief, wondering how much worse things could get. During the meeting with the investor, I tried to keep my voice calm and steady. I explained the facts, laid out the evidence that the campaign against me was not only personal but orchestrated by people with every reason to want to see me fail. Still, I saw the worry behind his eyes. As the meeting ended, I received a voicemail. My father's voice again, cold as ice. "If you don't help, there'll be nothing left for you but disgrace." I felt the old pain surface, but this time I didn't let it take hold. Evan sent me screenshots of the worst posts mapping the spread of the rumor in real time. Our IT lead traced more IP addresses back to Kansas, including one that matched a router registered under my father's name. Miles compiled a report for legal documenting each attack, each digital smear. I started keeping every piece of evidence, every screenshot, knowing I might need it soon. Through it all, I kept telling myself the truth. I am not their pawn. I am not a villain for surviving. No one gets to define me but me. I looked at my team, at the office I had built, and promised myself I would fight to keep it safe. The attacks would keep coming, but I would not run. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. Miles called me into his office and handed it over, his expression as grim as the Washington sky outside. It was an official legal complaint, my parents suing under Kansas's filial responsibility law, a relic almost never enforced. They accused me of abandonment, of failing to provide for them in their old age, citing screenshots from the very posts they'd planted online. Miles told me the law almost never holds up in court, but the scandal could do real damage. The case made the rounds in the local business press, and soon my inbox was full of worried partners asking if I'd be able to weather the storm. Then the attacks escalated. Evan forwarded me an email chain from a major client. Someone posing as a concerned citizen had written to them attaching a copy of the lawsuit and a series of accusations. A second letter landed in my mailbox. This one from the Department of Revenue referencing an anonymous tip that North Star Labs was committing financial fraud. Another email from an old vendor announced they were suspending all future business until the situation was resolved. Each blow hit harder than the last. My parents had gone from family to enemy, turning every tool at their disposal into a weapon, and I realized the battle was now public and personal. Our comms team was bombarded. Articles sprang up on tech news blogs repeating claims from anonymous sources. One outlet published a timeline of my childhood using lines pulled from posts written by my family, framing me as a heartless son who'd abandoned his roots for a paycheck. Staff at the company were shaken. Some came to me directly asking if the rumors were true, if they should be worried about their jobs. I told them as much of the truth as I could, but some damage had already been done. Miles and I met in the boardroom with Evan and stacks of reports in front of us. We weighed our options. Miles suggested we could go public with our side release, the receipts, the evidence, the paper trail that proved what really happened at Prairie Ridge, what my parents had done. After Evan said we needed to get ahead of the story, not just defend, but assert. We prepared statements, screenshots, letters from therapists, old school counselors, and even that police report Ruth filed after the train station. I began to see that if I wanted to save the company and myself, I couldn't keep my history a secret any longer. But every time we got close to launching our story, another letter or attack arrived. My parents sent anonymous emails to the IRS and our investors accusing me of financial impropriety. Miles found that the emails contained information only someone living in our house could have known. Password hints, security phrases, childhood nicknames, details that could only come from family. A journalist reached out saying he'd received a tip about me months ago from a close relative, someone who claimed I'd faked the entire train station story to gain sympathy and investments. Even Noah's name came up, his involvement now impossible to ignore. The stress was relentless. A key contract froze. Funds held until the investigation cleared. More partners threatened to pull out. I walked the city for hours, my phone heavy in my pocket, scrolling through headlines, messages, fragments of my life torn apart for public consumption. Every step I took, I weighed the cost of silence against the cost of speaking. By the time I reached the park in downtown Seattle, I'd made my decision. I was done hiding. I was done apologizing for surviving. Standing by the River City lights flickering on the water, I gripped my phone tight. I was ready to tell the whole truth, to show the world the facts, no matter who it upset, no matter what it cost. I texted Miles and Evan. It's time. I walked home, every muscle tight with anticipation, feeling a kind of freedom in the certainty of what I was about to do. For the first time, the fear felt smaller than my resolve. I looked up at the Seattle skyline, my company, my life, and thought, I have carried this story long enough. Now I will be the one to tell it. I sat at my desk in the silent office, light from the Duwamish River flickering on the wall as I weighed my choices. The walls of North Star Labs felt closer than ever. Every surface echoing with questions about who I was, what I owed, and what it meant to tell the truth. My hands trembled as I looked out the window. Rain streaking the glass, wondering if silence would finally drown me, or if speaking up would cost me everything. I thought of the people who believed in me, the years I spent building this company from the scraps of a childhood I was told to forget. It was time. Miles and Evan met me in the small glass meeting room, both with the air of men who'd slept little and worried much. Miles outlined the legal dangers again, his words measured and hard. There's risk, but no one's coming to save you. This decision is yours. Evan looked me in the eye, a steady warmth beneath his nervousness. You always said the truth is a kind of light, Caleb. If you believe that, let it shine. Now back at my apartment, I opened the tin box Ruth gave me, lining up each artifact on the coffee table. My mother's message about Prairie Ridge, the gas station receipt, the ticket stubs, even the business card from the truck driver who'd helped me. I took photos of every scrap of proof that my story had always been more than memory. Then I sat down to write. No more hiding, no more apology. I told the world about that autumn in Kansas, the abandoned train station, the years of punishment for mistakes only a child could make. I wrote about sleeping outside in winter, about counting my money in the dark, about the night I swore no one would define me but me. I described building a life in Wichita, then Seattle, my commitment to honesty and boundaries, and the relentless campaign that tried to tear it all down. I ended with a recording Noah's voice from the cafe confirming everything, explaining how our parents used my pain to keep him in line. My finger hovered over the post button for a long moment before I finally pressed it. I shared my story on Twitter, LinkedIn, everywhere that had once echoed with rumor and accusation. I watched as messages poured in. The hashtag #StandWithCaleb appeared, spreading faster than the lies ever had. Survivors wrote in sharing their own stories. Colleagues, strangers, even former clients messaged me with support. The narrative shifted. A well-respected journalist who'd once received those anonymous accusations reached out asking to see my evidence. I sent it all: screenshots, documents, old emails, even the paperwork Ruth filed after the train station. The next day, a series of articles dropped chronicling the truth, exposing the coordinated smear campaign, naming the systemic failures that let my family's abuse go unchecked. The letters Ruth had written were finally recognized. The world saw my family for who they really were, and the shadows they'd cast on my name began to dissolve. Business partners who'd wavered called back expressing support. Some investors who'd left quietly offered to return. Miles fielded emails from legal and tax officials, most now satisfied with the evidence. The mood in the office shifted. People looked at me with something like relief, and for the first time, pride, even as my parents' remaining defenders tried to stoke anger. The momentum was with the truth. Noah tried calling one last time, voice bitter and accusing, but I let it ring out. There was nothing left for him to say that I needed to hear. Late that night, I sat on my balcony, listening to the city, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I could breathe without fear. Every time I scrolled through the hashtag or read a new message from a stranger telling me how my story had helped them, the old ache in my chest eased. I looked down at the river and knew that whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. 6 weeks later, I found myself back on the highway to Prairie Ridge, the landscape as familiar as an old scar. The house I once called home was on the market, a battered sign hanging in the wind. I sat in the rental car for a long time, watching light shift through empty windows, feeling nothing but distance. The past could stay inside those walls. I didn't need to enter. I drove away without regret. In Seattle, life found a new rhythm. Noah showed up at my apartment, desperate and crying, asking for help, promising that things would change if I just gave one more chance. I listened, steady and unmoved, repeating the words I'd learned to live by. No one gets to define me but me. I told him to take care of himself, that we each have to decide where our story begins and ends. When he left, I blocked his number. It felt final, necessary, and right. That evening, I texted Ruth and asked her to dinner. We met at a little Mexican place in Capitol Hill, a place warm with laughter and soft light. Over enchiladas and margaritas, we remembered that night at the train station, all the years since, and the ways we'd both survived. Ruth slid the old tin box back across the table. You don't have to carry this anymore, but it's yours if you want it to remind you you made it. As I left the restaurant, phone in hand, I scrolled through dozens of new messages. People from around the country and beyond had reached out, telling me my story gave them courage to set boundaries of their own. A conference organizer invited me to speak on resilience and new beginnings. I accepted, feeling not pride, but something simpler: peace. I walked home beneath a pale sunset, the city glowing around me, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt free. Seattle's lights shimmered on the water as I stepped onto my balcony, old fears fading my future wide open. I told myself and anyone who needed to hear it that family is not just blood, it is kindness. Respect the people who stand by you when you can't stand alone. So I told my story. I encouraged anyone listening to do the same, to break away from what hurts, to write their own ending. And as the sky deepened tonight, I knew I'd finally stepped out from the shadow of Prairie Ridge, ready to begin again. Here's my truth. For years I believed that surviving meant keeping quiet, staying small, and pretending the past couldn't touch me if I just worked hard enough. But pain left unspoken only grows heavier, and silence is its own kind of prison. Telling my story didn't erase the scars, or the loneliness, or even the old ache of being left behind. It didn't magically fix the people who hurt me or restore what was lost, but it did set me free. It gave me the right to define myself, to build a life worth living on my own terms. Not as the child who was abandoned, but as someone who learned to fight, to care, to protect what matters. If you're reading this and carrying your own secret history, please know you're not alone. You get to choose which voices shape you. You have every right to walk away from what poisons you, even if the world tells you that family is everything. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to save yourself. And sometimes sharing your story isn't just about healing yourself. It's about giving someone else the courage to speak too. If my journey spoke to you, or even made you feel seen for a moment, I hope you'll let me know. Leave a comment, share your own experience, or simply say, "Hi, so I know you're out there." If you believe in stories that are raw, real, and remind us of the strength it takes to start over, please subscribe to this channel. Your support helps keep this space alive for others who need it. Thank you for listening truly. However you found your way here, I'm glad you did. And wherever you are in your own story, don't forget, you get to write the ending.